Hi everyone, it's Mike with Grain Realty. Hope you're all doing really well. This is part two of writing an offer. So hopefully up to this point, you've already seen my other video, part one, basically addressing the gathering of all of the information necessary in order to write an offer. Usually when I get an agent really excited, they finish a showing, they give me a call, say, Mike, my folks are ready to write an offer. Let's write an offer. It's like, okay, there needs to be a gathering of a lot of information before we get to that point, because these contracts, they can get very detailed, and we'll need to see a lot of that information addressed, specifically the buyer's needs, your client, and addressing the property. Every property is unique. We can't have a cookie cutter, it's just the price. Do you want to do a home inspection or not? And then you hang up the phone. So hopefully part one's already addressed quite a bit of that, and you're already utilizing a number of the different methods, tools, observing, gathering information at the showing, taking phone call, getting in a conversation with your client, and then documenting all that information down on a piece of paper somewhere. I have a nice template here that I'll show in just a second. So this video is basically you're up to this point, okay? So without much delay, let's get right into meat of things here. So I'm going to bring up a subject property. I'm on the MLS right now. This is the home page. So let me bring up a subject property. And I think I just recently was taking a look at one that could be a good fit for us. So for you at home, you'll already be typing and bringing in that property here. So I like the search bar, house number, street name. You can even do the first letter and then an asterisk. And then that'll kind of be like a wild card to fill everything else in. New listing here, I thought was kind of interesting. So we'll use this as our subject property. We're going to have a multitude of tabs that are going to be opening, things that I definitely work out of. My email, because it'll have the prequel letter. I'm going to be obviously working out of the MLS, and the other tab will be Authentisign. So from Authentisign here, or transaction desk, we'll be clicking this icon from this listing specifically. This will automatically grab that information from the listing, and it'll automatically begin to input a lot of that data for us, which is kind of convenient. Alrighty. So this page is loading for us to write an offer in Authentisign. So name, I usually like to put hyphen and then offer. Template, we're going to be working out of basic forms, and then it'll kind of input the rest here. The MLS number, super important. Selling agent, that's you. You can designate what you are if you're both, if you're an agent on both sides of the situation. But for this, I'll just say there's a listing agent and a seller on the other side, and I'll be like yourself, a buyer's agent representing my client, the buyer. So we'll go to create. Alrighty, so this window right here, it allows us to make any small edits. I know this sounds a little crazy, but if somebody inputted the name of the street, town, road incorrectly, that would be an opportunity to make those corrections in this window. Because if you were to make those corrections, and then as you begin to mark up these documents, you don't want to make a correction on one page and you have all these other addendums addressing the address of the property and it's incorrect. Now you have to do that on every one. This one page allows it to be corrected on all of them. All right, so this one kind of standard information. Basically with these first like 2 steps here, I kind of skip through this part because I usually don't have to make any adjustments or changes. Now with regard to the contacts, this is adding contacts specifically for this property. The way I like to kind of frame what we're looking at here, think of it like a manila folder, right? We have this property, your client, we're going to put their kind of contact information, their Rolodex information is going to be in this folder, and then we're going to be gathering different forms and we're putting everything into this manila folder, okay? So kind of get that mental headspace of what we're creating right here. Contacts, usually it's going to be a new contact for you, right? If you've never written with them before, you'd be creating new. If it's a past client, you'd be clicking pre-existing. So just for fun, I'll show you if it was a new client. You'd designate, this is a very important step because Authenticide needs to know where to put their signature blocks. So it would be for a buyer, and then you would put first name, last name, and their email address. Email is super important. I know it doesn't have the asterisk, meaning it has to be there, but this is an e-signing. When you send it, it needs to go somewhere. So definitely get the preferred email addresses of your client. Okay, so let me just cancel that. Otherwise, you'd click save, and then they would be added here. I'm just gonna do a pre-existing, and let me see here. Poor Abby, I'm gonna borrow our transaction coordinator. She will be my client. Okay, and again, you see these designations here. Just for fun, I'm going to change her from what we usually have as her general, and you'll see her as a buyer this time. And I'll save that information. That's important too. As you just saw, I'm able to pivot this person's contact information to a seller or a buyer. Some of you out there might have a client who's coming from a seller, selling their home, doing e-signings, and now we're pivoting, and we need to designate them as a buyer for their purchase. Okay. Now, if you were to go to a prequel letter, and again, let's just pretend this is Abby Webb right there, you would select both spouses on the document, right? So any buyer who's on this prequel or proof of funds, if it's cash, if it's two people, then you're getting the full legal names of both of them and their preferred email addresses. If it's just one person, then you can only, if it's a spouse's situation, but only the wife is prequelled or only the husband's prequelled, then you're only using that individual's contact information. Okay, and I like to pull it right from the prequel exactly how the lender has it. So sometimes just copying, pasting, and going from there. Okay, but again, for hypothetical, we're just going to use Abby as my buyer in this case. So next, we're going to grab some forms. All right, so I'm going to click Add. Now, forms for listings are different. That would be right up here. We're going to go to Purchase. All right, and from this point, for you at home watching, it'll be very important to select the documents as I'm selecting only that are applicable to you. Okay, so if you have a VA buyer, a USDA buyer, then you'll be paying attention to what I have. If it's a conventional buyer, then you'll be ignoring any of the steps that are relevant to your situation here. So I'm not making a video for a VA, a USDA, FHA, conventional, cash. You folks at home will kind of get selecting the information that pertains to you. Okay, so if you happen to have a VA client, you'll select this top form, all parties agree to the VA. Scrolling down here, you can ignore some of these, not all of them are applicable. The things that you have to include is fair housing on the buy side, agency disclosure, New York State required document on the buy side. Don't worry about the inspection form or anything like that, even if we have a VA. Okay. Personal property agreement. Okay. Let's select that. If there's personal property that we want to have come with the property. If we're doing an escalation clause, we would select this. If you're not doing it, obviously don't include it. If you're writing at asking, or if you're starting out below, you would not be using an escalation clause. If they're choosing to do a home inspection, you'd be selecting this property inspection document. If they're choosing to waive it, then we'll address that part. But if they're choosing to waive it, you would leave this document out. Okay. Now, if they were to be making a purchase on a particular property, if it's going to be basically like a property that has vacant land, or it's a townhouse, or if it's a single-family residential home, you needing to select the correct document. But for most all of these properties, it's going to be single-family residential home. If they are contingent on selling, meaning they have a home that they currently live in, they need to sell that in order to purchase, then you would be selecting this document. So I'll go over this document as well. If your property is connected sewer and water, it's not a well and it's not a septic, okay? Meaning connected water, connected sewer, and you can see, it helps if I don't close the property out completely. Let me get right back to that. So it'll say on the MLS, when you scroll down to the bottom right, it'll say the types of the utilities that will be part of that property, right? So it'll say for water, here, I got the property right here. There we go. Just hit an X by mistake there. So right here, sewer, sewer connected, water, public connected. That means it's all through the municipalities, or basically all of those utilities with the town or the city. So it's not on its own independent water source, a well, or a septic system, okay? So you just kind of cross-reference the MLS and you click back and forth between the two. But if it does have one of these things and your seller wants to test one of these things, or both of these things, a well and a septic, or sometimes it's just a septic because maybe they have water in front of them, okay? So you'll see this, this number 9 here. Every time that we're adding something, it's adding to it. So I'll have to click add and next. And then for documents, so this is anything kind of exterior from what's just kind of standard documents out of the AuthentiSign here. Certain documents that are more like Crane Realty, in-house, or a prequel letter, you go through this part here and you add them. So you click add, and then as you can see, I already have a downloaded inspection waiver. You can grab this from the Crane Realty resources reference page, or if you need it, I can email it to you, save it on your desktop. You just click and drag, and you see it uploads. Now we're going to switch over here. We're going to get our prequel letter, download that. You see it just drops over there. For your computer, it might be a little different. And then drag and drop. Perfect. So what we've essentially done is, again, we have that manila folder and we're putting all of the necessary applicable documents and information and contacts into this manila folder, okay? Now we're gonna go sit down at a desk and start doing what's called marking up. So you're gonna mark up these documents. So it doesn't necessarily matter the particular order of these things. So you should have documents, and you should have forms in this part right here. Now I'm going to do something that might give some people some stress or anxiety. If you were to have the internet fail, your browser quits on you or something, how do you get back to this page? So let's just simulate and do that. I'm just going to quit it, okay? Something happened to AuthentiSign and it's gone. At this point, if you are on the MLS and you're like, all right, I need to go to AuthentiSign, do not click on this. What you're going to do is, so you already have a folder that kind of already saved itself, right? We walked over to the table, there's a folder there. Going back to this step and clicking this will essentially create 2 folders. You don't want to do that. Unless you have multiple clients. You have the Smiths that are interested in this property, then you did another showing the next day and it's for the Joneses, and now you're doing this property. So you'll have to designate separate folders each time even though it's out of the same property. Let's get ahead of ourselves a little bit. There's a nice way to organize that. But what I'm saying is, out of the MLS, don't click on from the listing this, okay? You've all been warned. Just simply go to your home page, find Lone Wolf Transaction Desk. The tab loads, and then right from transactions, you can see right here where we left off. Perfect. No problem. Okay, so that's how you get back into Transaction Desk. If you start marking up, you have your client reach out to you, say, hey, we're having second thoughts, or hey, can we get back to you about something? And you're like, well, I'm not going to sit here for the next couple of hours until you get that resource or that question answered. So you can quit it, where you've been working and then come back to it. But that's how you get it from the MLS, and you click on that page, not specifically from the listing. Okay. So let's click on this first document, well and septic. If this isn't applicable to you in any way, and it's already connected, water and sewer, kind of skip ahead a little bit. So you'd select today's date. If they're testing for potability, meaning they want to know for the well, is it safe to drink? They can do that. So you select testing for potability right here. If you have any type of inkling or think possibly, it takes some time to kind of figure these certain things out, but if you wanted to test for volume as well, meaning is it a shallow well, is it a hand dug well, do they run out of water, do they have a truck that shuttles down to the local village and collects water, and are they dumping it into this like shallow well? Does it run out? We have run into situations like that in the past. Having a home that runs out of water is problematic. Being able to test for that is a good thing, so you can select that. Now this checkbox is specific for the septic to be pumped and inspected, okay? So for this test result and for the rest of these, what's common, it's like a 35 days to have these things tested, performed, and then the results coming back by this timeline. To review, usually we'll give ourselves a buffer of 5 days for the seller reviewing 5 days. And then this is an option that you get to choose one or the other. What's common, especially for the septic, if we're only talking about septic, it certainly is common for the seller to be the one selected because it's their septic, right? Not to be gross, but it's their septic. They've been using it. They can pump it. That's what's been pretty much the common norm in our market. If your buyer really wants to have that tested, but they don't want to lose it, testing a septic, that could be in and around like $350, $450, maybe even upwards of $500, depending on the size of it, how long that company's going to be there, how far they have to drive. So yeah, like a $350 to $500 could be pretty expensive. Your buyer might be willing to pay for that. It depends on how much funds they have up front. They get to then select who they want to have test it too, which is kind of nice. But just to kind of stay with social norms in the marketplace, we'll select seller expense. Okay. This next part, just leave it blank. If the listing agent is actually aware of this being filled out, probably will not accept the offer. You could read through that paragraph, otherwise I'd be happy to get a conversation with you to explain further. I don't want to get too much on a tirade here. So you just click save and exit. Okay. Sale and transfer. So this is if you have a property and a buyer who needs to sell their home that they're currently living in. So on their prequel, it mentions they are contingent on selling, okay? So the loan officer has told you, the buyers have already told you they have to sell their home. This is what the form would look like. Okay, so we'll click on that. Again, if it's not applicable, skip ahead just a little bit. So for right here, you're going to have the address of the property of your client, okay? Their house number, their street name, okay? And from this point, you can select the dates, whether they're going to have it on the market by a certain date. Usually it's pretty tight. It's going to be saying that we'll get an accepted offer and have this property up on the market in like 2 weeks from the acceptance of, moving forward with the buy side for them. If they've already sold the property and it's been on the market for a little bit, they might already have some of these contingencies satisfied, okay? So it just depends on how far in that transaction they are. So you would select what's applicable for you, okay? So this top part right here is just saying when they, it's not entered into a contract, buyer shall have until blah, 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 to obtain a contract. So this part here, we're going to be saying, we'll put it on the market and we're expecting that we're going to get under contract by a specific date. So usually 14 days, maybe 21 days. Depends on how aggressive you want to be. Okay. The bump notice, that's usually common for 3 days. This part right here, that's social norm in the market for 3 days. It's basically just saying if a cash offer comes and they're going to give you $500,000 for this property, someone saw it way after the fact, the seller is providing you a bump notice of within 3 days, you have to satisfy all the contingencies of the sale of your home and basically have it just get ready to close. It's kind of impossible, unfortunately, but putting anything much longer on here, usually the listing agent will either counter or not accept your offer. Okay? So because this is really theoretical, I'm not kind of putting anything in here, but again, that's what you would have to do. Your client's address, when they would anticipate getting an accepted offer, or if they've already put it on the market, then they would click what's applicable and then the 3 days. Okay, and then the rest of it's pretty boilerplate information there. Okay. Purchase and sales contract. Okay, so for those who have been painfully waiting, this part is going to be really the meat and potatoes of your whole offer. Okay. So it starts out by identifying the seller, the buyer. From here, you can click over to the property that we were working out of. You can see Ontario County, Farmington. You can scroll down here just to double check. It's not in the village, it's not in the city. So ergo, it's going to be in the town. So select town, lot size, come all the way back up here, right from behind the number, and then go across, copy and paste. This is better than saying 0.17, 0.171. Acres, put acres in there, okay? Description of the property. I usually like to just kind of copy what they have. So colonial and split level, well, that's not true. This is just a split level. I don't know why the listing agent put colonial, but okay. You can tell it's a split level because the one level is right in the middle between two other levels. That is the technical definition of a split level. Sometimes you'll see like a raised ranch with a door in the middle and 4 sets of steps going up or down. That's a raised ranch. It's completely different. This is a split level. So just select split level, copy, or you can spell it, whatever you like. With attached garage. If there was a shed that came with the property, or something else in particular that was a characteristic that is affixed to the property, you can mention it in this spot here. Okay. Personal property. If you had just a small handful of items, you can just detail them right here. You would simply go to this part, appliances, and then copy and paste and drop them all in. We do have another form that I'm just going to reference too. And I usually like to just reference a completely separate form. So I'll say see attached. Okay. Items that are excluded. None. If there is any exclusions, then they're usually going to be put down in private remarks. I did a showing the other day and they said excluded from this listing is the clock that was in the living room or something. So you can put that down. Then you select checkbox seller shall, and I'll explain this in a hot second, but you're going to say no exceptions. Okay. So what this paragraph reads is basically when you do the final walkthrough and if the hot water heater doesn't work, you're running water, you're testing for hot water, it doesn't work, or they have a flooded basement, or an appliance doesn't work, or even worse, like the furnace isn't working or something like that, they're on the hook. Okay. So the seller, even though you waived an inspection, they're still going to be on the hook making sure that those things are working. Okay. Now, this is kind of where we're getting into our offer checklist, right? So we have Abby as our buyer. We would have the target closing date that they want to close by, the loan type, an escalation clause, anything that's applicable, we'd have all this information right here, okay? So I'm kind of just going off of a theoretical, what my client might be doing. So let's just say at asking, and it's kind of miserly. Let's just go straight to the 200K. Yeah, that's perfect. After that, there's a deposit. A deposit really needs to be at least 2% of the agreed upon purchase price. Anytime with numerics, when you increase that number, it's going to look better. I've literally had buyers ask me, Mike, we're going to do a deposit for $4,000. If we were to increase it, does that look better? Of course it does. They've even said that about price and stuff too. It's like, of course it's going to look better. Anytime with numerics, you increase it, it's just going to look that much better. Minimum 2%. So 4,000, you don't want to go any lower than that. That's a bit of a head scratcher. But let's say Abby's super motivated and she wants to do something pretty bold. Okay, that's going to look decent. If you can do 10 grand, that's going to look great. If you can do 15 grand, that's going to look great. The deposit, and I don't know how much is redundant from the last video that I mentioned, it's going to go into an escrow account. It's a literal bank account, could be a local CMB, Lions, community bank, and it's an actual account that's created for the sole purpose of the transaction between the buyer and the seller and the outcome of this transaction. So depending on if we get through all the contingencies and we get to closing and your client closes, these funds will be applied towards those closing costs, the down payment or whatever else, right? Or if your client acts outside of the details of the contract, we're a week away from closing and they're like, you know what, New York kind of sucks. Let's move to Florida. They're going to lose their deposit. They're acting outside of the details of the contract. So that doesn't work for them. If you do a home inspection and you find something catastrophic and you want to can the deal, then yes, you'd be entitled to get those funds back. That's how that would work. Okay. So we're also going to say it's going to be a personal check, official check. It doesn't really matter too much. Select something up there. If we were to do seller financing, you could do that. Only if it's an FHA loan. Actually, I think you can do seller's concessions with conventional, but I think it's up to like 3%. FHA, I believe it can go as far as 6%, and that's the same with like a VA and a USDA as well. Talk with the loan officer, talk with your buyer, see if that's necessary, okay? If you can leave seller's concessions out, which again, that fancy term is just another way for your client to finance some of their closing costs. So if their closing costs for a 100K property to purchase, and the loan officer says, all right, your closing costs are going to be $9,000, your client's like, oh shoot, I only have like 4,000 or 5,000. Then we can finance the closing costs with their loan type of like a VA or a USDA loan or an FHA loan. Usually you can go up to 6%. So how that looks like, if it's for a 100K list price, 6% off of that is going to bring the seller's net down to 94,000. So when they look at your offer, they'll see the list price, but then they're going to do the math and realize, all right, this is actually 94,000 I'm getting in that hypothetical of 100% for a purchase price. Okay. So make sure that you really see on the pre-quote or have a conversation with the loan officer, do they need seller's concessions? If yes, go right here. Okay. And then for what amount? And then this is just details. This is going to be the deposit and it's going to be delivered within 2 days. Make sure your client is very aware that once they get an accepted offer, they have 2 days to get a check from the bank or handwrite a check, and it's going to go to apparently M&T for this property for Howard Hanna. Yeah, they use M&T. Okay. Scrolling down, some of these paragraphs are a little bit more boilerplate and not so applicable, at least for the offers that I write, so it's not too concerning. Let's go to our prequel. So conventional, okay? You can copy and paste or just type it, whatever you like. Okay, so we are going to put the contingency of a mortgage. We're conventional, and then we're going to do basically how much is the loan amount, okay? So let's go back to the prequel for a hot second. Sometimes it'll say the loan to value is 95% or something like that. But in this circumstance, we're actually going to subtract the mortgage amount from the purchase price. I said subtract, I mean divide, excuse me. So let's take 205 divided by 270, and I'm sure some of you could have figured that out in your heads, but it's 74.5, okay? So let's just go to 74.5. And then this part, rate not to exceed. So you can go back to their prequel. And at the time, and I'm using a very old prequel, their interest rate's like super low, which is great. Good for them. It's like 3.25. Right now, in our current market date of this video, springtime 2023, interest rates are high 6, low 7. So you might want to put your buffer at like 7.5, maybe 8. Usually you kind of want to put it 1 percentage point north of what they're financed to. Okay. Term, usually it's a 30-year loan. If it says otherwise, it might say a 15-year or 20-year. And we're going to get the mortgage commitment at a certain date. So let's give our loan officer a full calendar month. So today's date's the 29th. Let's go to 28th. That should be good enough. This part right here, I usually leave blank, especially if it's conventional. Then we should have a good shot at financing or appraising out in condition, excuse me. This paragraph and what this line basically says is after the appraisal is done, if there's a condition that is not satisfactory, meaning there's a broken window, there's chipping paint on the side of the house or something, or there's a handrail that needs to go down a set of steps, because of our loan type is flagging that, usually an FHA, a VA, USDA, we can put the seller on the hook for a certain amount of money. Usually the social norm does not get above like 300 or something, but you can really scare the person if you put something too crazy in, like 5,000. Okay, the listing agent's got to bring that to the attention of their client, okay? But if you think, and it takes practice and it takes seeing and doing a number of different deals, maybe you can leave that at 0, particularly if it's conventional. Basically, if something does get flagged, then it's a conversation between both parties and they try to work something out, okay? For now, I'll leave that blank, but if you do have an FHA or a VA, maybe just putting on $100 for a can of paint or something, or an inexpensive handrail, and somebody who can come on out and do that repair, no problem. If it's cash, you're going to be selecting this and then selecting when you're providing these proof of funds, if it's cash. Otherwise, you're using the mortgage contingency. Sale and transfer of title, you would be selecting this if, again, you already did the other addendum, that sale and transfer of title contingency. If this does not apply, don't select it. Are you doing a home inspection? If yes, then select C. If you're not doing either of these, something that I like to see is just like a nice little visual, is just crossing them both out. Okay. Scrolling down, again, some more boilerplate stuff on your own time, especially before writing any offer. challenge yourself and read through every one of these paragraphs to familiarize yourself with them. I don't want to make this video be astronomically lengthy, just going over really minute details of things that don't really apply, okay? If we wanted to type up a specific contingency or something, like let's say there's a tenant and we want to say something to the effect of seller to have the tenant removed 2 weeks prior to closing scheduled. Okay, so we have that contingency in there. Otherwise, this whole offer doesn't ever address the fact we're buying from this investor landlord who has a tenant in there and they haven't kicked the tenant out. You don't want to get to the part where everyone shrugs their shoulders and be like, well, you didn't put that in the contract. We're set to close. It's not a contingency. And we're like, well, yeah, but we don't want to move in because there was a tenant there. So you can get wordy, you can get specific and tailor. There's a whole bunch of different areas. You can begin to tailor your offer. Attorney approval, 3, always do 3, keep it to 3, 3 is good. But this basically, right when we get an accepted offer, there's a duration of time of 3 days we're selecting where your client can review the offer, ask their attorney any questions, and if they're good with everything, provide their approval. Otherwise, if they wake up the next morning and they're on the wrong side of the bed and they're like, what are we thinking? We should be moving to Florida and canning this whole thing. New York is cold. Then they can can the deal and provide their disapproval, okay? But keep it short, keep it for 3 days, okay? Next part here, you'd be selecting the property, looking under attachments. You should have already done this at the showing or prior to the showing, looking and seeing the PCD, bringing to the attention of your client anything that you find on the property condition disclosure. If it's already provided, you'd be selecting that the seller has provided it. If it's an estate, a bank, or some other type of party that basically they're not responsible for providing a property conditions disclosure, they should be making mention in it under private remarks, or you can see under seller sometimes, and then you'll know, hey, there's no PCD, in which case you'll select that it's not applicable, okay? If it's an investor, you won't be selecting this part, but this basically says that your client is going to be living on the property and that the seller represents that the property is in good standing, there's no list pendings that are filed or anything like that, so selecting those 2 is good. Sometimes people like to put a certain dollar amount of like $100 or $150 because sometimes pulling certain certifications costs money. Usually people will only say what's on file with the town will be provided. I tend not to get too caught up into this simply because of our geographic location. It's not very big into new construction. There's not a lot of permits. There's so much that's grandfathered in because we have 1900 homes that don't have permits. That's to try to ask for a lot of it. It's a little much. Okay. But usually they're going to provide what's on file with the town. And what's on file with the town will be provided, and that's what you get. Usually that's more than fine. I've really never had anyone argue or complain about that. Residential, if I can spell correctly. Okay. So zoning, residential, if it's something else like commercial or it's lot or something like that, you'd be doing something different. Obviously, if it was a lot, you'd be using a completely different form. Under mineral rights, oil, timbers, and so on, no exceptions. There we go. Now we're selecting anything that's applicable for this property. Again, you just go back to the listing, scroll it down, sewer and water. They do have heating fuel as gas. They do have electric available to them. God help them if they don't. Electric, they have natural gas there. If they had propane, you'd be selecting propane, and then you'd be coming down to this part right here. And they'll make a mention if the propane is owned, in which case you'd say is owned by the seller. Usually it's a leased tank. Is not owned. I know it gets a little confusing here, in that there is an existing written contract. Okay, so that's how you would do propane. But for now, we'll just say natural gas, do public sewer, public water. If it was on well and septic, you'd be selecting these instead of the other two. So selecting what's applicable. Again, county, Ontario County, and save. Target closing date. I never say closing date. I always say target closing date. Why do I do that? Well, it's to set the expectation that this is a date that we're all shooting for. We, as realtors, have no control over their lender, over our attorney, over the seller's attorney, over the listing agent, over the seller, and any other parties that get involved with the transaction. Ideally, everyone's professional, everyone's working super quickly and efficiently, and hopefully we don't run into any surprises. Certain things will delay things, but the target closing date, it's just to set that expectation for your seller. Don't schedule this day off, don't schedule movers. As we get close, we will get to a point where, especially when we get past the mortgage commitment, we're already past a bunch of other front-loaded contingencies, the attorney approval, any inspections, so on. We're past all that. Now we can really start kind of fine-tuning our closing date here. A 45-day closing, it's a month and then a half. Usually 60-day closing is pretty common, especially if you have a lot of contingencies. Then you just got to accept the fact that you're looking more at a 60-day. If you're waiving a whole ton of stuff, if the property is vacant and you want to create more of a attractive offer, you're buying from an investor flipper or an estate where they just want to sell everything and be done really fast and they want their money yesterday, maybe shortening that and trying to do a 45-day would be encouraging. So let's do 1. So we're past that day, that's 1, and then 2. So somewhere down there. See, I don't really count. I just kind of figure it out quickly. Possession of property, for pretty much every transaction, it's going to be getting possession at closing. All right, right here, this refers to survey, okay? So if you happen to see, maybe in private remarks, the listing agent will say, buyer to accept pre-existing survey. Or if you're observant and you see that they have a recently dated survey within 4 years, would be good. After that, it starts getting a little bit too much. But if we click here, and we kind of have a way of making our offer more attractive. For a survey, it could cost, it depends on how big the lot is and how in-depth the person needs to get. But if we do want to put down that we'll accept a pre-existing survey, you're going to grab a text box, if I can do it, and then you're going to say something to the effect, I'm just going to verbally say it for you out loud, buyer to accept pre-existing survey with an affidavit of no change, pending lender approval, period. If lender does not approve, or excuse me, if not approved, then paragraph 7 will apply. Paragraph 7, okay? And then you can edit, you can change, you can do colors and do all sorts of different stuff here. And usually I do blue, never select red. Red just upsets people. And then I put that big long sentence right in here. I also make mention of it in the email that I send, and if I can get a phone call in with the listing agent, I let them know. Okay. Anything that showcases your offer in the best light, try to put that in there. Okay. If your buyer desperately wants to have the yard pinned, it's not expensive for the survey. It's like a flag or two, but to basically, you could say something to the effect of seller to have surveyor, and I like to put the little thing right here, and frankly, that part I don't bring to the attention of anybody, but I just start typing in this little spot and then kind of get my height just right, and I put right into this little spot right here sometimes. I usually do not really ever do this, but if I know that my client wants to put in a fence in the backyard, the fence installer needs to have pins, especially if they're going to bring that boundary line close. They need to see pins. And I've run into situations where the surveyor, they get a lazy surveyor out there who doesn't buy flags and doesn't just standardly put them in. And it's like, well, was this even surveyed? Yeah, it was. They just didn't pin it with the little pink flags. Now we don't know. We got to pay the surveyor to go back out. That's a couple $100, and your buyer's mad at you. So if you have those conversations, you get them all fleshed out. You can put it in here, and after getting it accepted and stuff, just kind of be like, hey, make sure the surveyor pins the flags. It's in the contract. Seller, the listing agent, they're responsible for reading every word of this contract before accepting. Okay. So you want to select yourself. All parties agree. You want to get paid for it, right? So make sure you select yourself. Paragraph 8 is a good paragraph. Again, very boilerplate goes the rest of the paragraphs that I'm going to go by because it's not really anything that we get to interact with. You should read it. You should know all about what's there. Select anything that's applicable. If we're FHA or VA, if there's a lead addendum, if we have a personal property home inspection, is it in Wayne County? Are we doing a well and septic? So go through anything that's here and make it applicable. Okay, I'm just unselecting because I'm going through a theoretical situation, but you yourself add any addendums that are applicable, and then you also say if you're doing an escalation. Yeah, it helps if I say if I spell it right. Escalation. There we go. Waiver, here we go. So type those things down, escalation, inspection waiver, anything that is applicable. This is another paragraph. If you wanted to put something in here like a rent back option or something very specific, you can enter that in here. Now for this listing, you go and you see when our offers due. So you want to make sure that you get this out prior to that day and time. Buyers require closing. Okay, so actually that's interesting. I should have referenced this. Buyer requires closing around May 2nd. So just so for best practices, we're going back to May 12th. So that's like a 45-day closing. Good for them. There you go. So now I changed it. You'd have to have a conversation about that with your client and be like, hey, I know you want to put a lot of contingencies in here. We have to speed it up. This is a desired thing by the seller. Are we able to do that? Okay. Let's see. Don't they have delayed negotiations? Oh, offers are due Monday at noon. Okay. So usually give them 24 hours for the life of the offer. Okay, which is right here. So you'd select, the day after, and then if it is noon, I know it's kind of petty, but I like to do 59 and then A. Why do I do that? Because I've had in the past where I've put 12 p.m. and then I've literally had listing agents tell me, well, Mike, that means our offer's good up until midnight. It's not good until midnight. So I just try to get ahead of the situation. So that's just me. That's a wonky little thing I do. If you're waiving an inspection, select this. If they are doing an inspection, don't select it, okay? Leave the rest of this page blank. This is the countering, accepting, interacting page between the seller and the buyer, so don't do anything there. And then you can come down here, and again, going back to our checklist, you should have attorney's information, who they're having as their attorney. You'd put the name in here, their address. I have addresses of Christy Miller and Steve Peterson memorized. You don't need to memorize them, but it helps, and it looks really professional that when the listing agent's like, okay, we're going to accept the offer, and then we're going to get cranking. The next thing, after everyone signs, we're going to send this out to everybody. And if it's like, well, we haven't figured out who we're having represent us, it's going to look bad. You don't want to look bad. Have that conversation figured out ahead of time if you can. And then put it into this part here. Make sure you have the phone number at the very least, but I like to fill out everything, fax, email, and so on. So we're at the end of the meat and potatoes segment. That's the purchase and sales contract. Save and exit. Property inspection. Again, only applying if you're doing a property inspection. If you're waiving it, then you're not including it. So a licensed engineer. Anything else that's applicable? Are they doing a radon test? These other two things really are not common to see. Frankly, if there are pests, some sort of infiltration of animals, wild animals getting into the house, or bugs, or those different types of like board beetles that go into old wood and stuff like that. A good home inspector is going to be documenting that anyway. It's a little redundant to be putting that kind of thing there, but some people do. If you want to test for something very specific, you can put that down. Otherwise, you're going to be selecting 5, 6, 7 days, and then you're going to be doing 2 and 2. And then I like to cross out this one section right here, and then I put this little line, and then I'm going to say something to the effect of receiving both written attorney approvals. Okay? And then clean that up a little bit. So why we're doing that and saving it just like this, we're doing that simply because we want to make sure that there's no overlap between the days. So for the property inspection, this is pretty standard of what I write, typically giving you a buffer of 5 days, 2 days to review, 2 days for a response from the seller, and then this paragraph right here, because as it currently reads right here, if there were to be the home inspection, this basically coincides with the attorney approval. What happens if you schedule and you do the home inspection on the 3rd day? Your client's shelling out $800. Yeah, 800. Maybe like a $500. I have seen 800. That was like a recent one. It's based on the square footage. It can get very pricey, but typically around $500. So let's say $500. And on the 3rd day, the seller has their seller's attorney send out a disapproval. Your client's going to be out that money. So just trying to make it as a domino falls one to the next. That's why I write it like this. All right, so just click and save. Perfect. All right, so we did a lot of these already. All right, next one's an escalation. So again, if this is applicable to you for your offer, if you're utilizing an escalation, you'll be having this document be part of your offer. The way that I typically like to phrase it, and you can borrow some of this jargon as you're conversing with your clients to figure out what they would like for their offer. When it comes to highest and best, you'll hear that from the listing agent. When it comes to delayed negotiations, we're only getting one shot to present an offer. So we need to make sure that it's an offer that just like one dart in one hand, one throw, that's all we get. We want to land a bullseye. We don't get a whole bunch of redos, right? So an escalation is a nice way for us to kind of start a little lower and then escalate up towards essentially a number that, and this is how I phrase it to my client, what is the number that you're comfortable going up to? That if I were to tell you, hey, it was a cash buyer, they went 10,000 or several thousands over us, at what point for you are you like, no, I have to walk from the property? That's fine if they want to go for that, but this is what I'm comfortable with. Because the worst conversation to have with a client or to have with you, the buyer, is telling me, hey, Mike, we left money on the table. After thinking about, we really could have gone up another 10K. The wrong time to be telling me that, so flesh out all of those conversations, get that out of your clients, go through those exercises and really determine your ceiling number. So we'll select today's date. How an escalation works, it starts with the purchase and sales contract, that meat and potatoes document we already talked about. you have a floor number, essentially where you're starting at. Sometimes it's at asking. Sometimes if you want to express interest that we can do a little bit better, just to show our involvement, maybe you'll do like $5,000 over. And then from that point, you can do whatever the ceiling number is, and then there's a factor number. So it's literally like a room, right? You have your floor, you have your ceiling, and then your factor number is essentially like jumping up over your competition and then up to that certain number. So usually you want to make the factor number persuasive. $1,000, $2,000 is not persuasive generally. It depends on if you're cash, then cash and escalating over by a little bit generally looks nicer. If you're a conventional or FHA trying to beat cash, you're trying to coerce the seller off of that competing offer. And I've seen sellers say, you know what, $2,000 is just not enough for me to pivot and go off of cash or off of a conventional to pick up a VA or an FHA loan. $2,000 is a lot of money. It's a lot of money to me. But for sellers, there's only two things that they're interested in. How much net can I get for this property? And what's the easiest path from here to closing, otherwise known as terms? How many terms? What's my easiest path from A to B? Because if I have to go through somebody that's going to waive everything and gives me the most net, then I want to go with them, obviously. So that's really what it comes down to. A nice factor, if we're going to be in the social norms for like 150K to 200, try to at least make it 4 to 5. If you're going to be at 200K to 250, being north of 5, upwards of 7,500. And then certainly when you're pushing 300, it's nice to be 300K and up, 300, 350K, 400K, trying to at least hit 7,500, 10 grand, 15 grand at that point. Okay. Lake stuff, 3/4 mil, you're talking about 15,000, maybe even 20,000. Okay. But for our purposes here, we're just going to keep it simple. Let's say, and I'm just doing this for hypothetical, let's say they're pretty aggressive and they want to go to something like that. Okay. So that's all the editing on the escalation. So here's the factor, it's the small number, and then the big number right here. You will need to come back, put in the official number. It might be the ceiling, or it might be something a little bit smaller, depending on what our competition is. This does say that we need to see proof of the other competing offer, okay? So they'll send us blacked out the buyer's names, proof of their funding, and just like 6 pages of the purchase and sales document is acceptable. Personal property. So let's see here. Again, on the purchase and sales document, you can just cut and paste those items there. If you get something that's a little lengthy, or if you just kind of want to itemize it and keep things a little bit cleaner, as I do, you can do this. $1 is what they'll pay for it, because you can't be taxed on 0. Okay, that's pretty simple. Just copy and paste what's applicable. Sometimes they throw the word negotiable into their description. Just make sure you read and delete those things. If there's a dehumidifier in the basement, if they have window AC units, if there's certain things that are not attachable to the house that your client really appreciates, flesh out those conversations. You're the realtor. They don't know what's coming and not coming, and there are certain opportunities to add or keep those things out. Are you going to muddy up your offer? Maybe it looks muddy by adding a whole ton of stuff. Maybe you just keep it super clean. It depends on how hot the property is, your competition, what your client wants. Ultimately, you're going to do what your client wants. That's the first and the foremost. Okay, so disclosure. It's pretty simple. This part is not a contract. These paragraphs just explain what things are, like a dual agency, a buyer's agent, and so on. You'll select buyer and a buyer's agent for pretty much every situation, unless you're the dual agent. You'll be representing both sides, or something a little bit more complex. If it's a Crane Realty scenario, then it will be a dual agent with designated sales agent, in which case you'd be selecting that if you as a Crane Realty agent are buying one, like my listing or another agent's or something like that. And then you select buy, or buyer rather. Save. And then the last one's fair housing. We don't have to do anything there. Okay, so what did we just do? We got our manila folder. We put our correct contacts that we want to see be part of the transaction. We grabbed a whole bunch of different forms that are applicable to our transaction, both the property and what our client wants to see. We grabbed documents from the outside of AuthentiSign, things like maybe a waiver that we're looking to do, or the pre-qual or a proof of funds, and we put that into our manila folder, and then we went and sat down at a table and then we mocked everything up. So that's what we just did. Now comes the fun part. We need to take that and we're going to send it out. Okay, so we're going to get it sent out for signatures. You click the pen right here. You can see all of my transactions. But you go here, and then you select the most recent one that you were working out of. So this is important. So what did I just do? I went to add, because I'm going to create an e-signing. You add from transactions, select the folder, the manila folder that's applicable. Now maybe if you have a whole bunch of wishing wells, these are all a bunch of offers. This is, instead of offer, you'd say the Joneses or the Smiths or whomever. And that's how you try to keep the e-signings you're working out of consistent. Okay, so you're going to select that folder, and now we're going to select the next part here. So you put the name, wishing, I can make it look nicer than that. There we go, wishing well lane offer. Now when you're going to do other things, let's say you get an accepted offer, you'll still have this manila folder to be working out of. And let's say you do some sort of an addendum. Target closing date's been moved, so you do an extension, or you're removing a contingency. Let's say the home inspection passes with flying colors, so you're going to do buyer's notice of removal of contingency. It's a lengthy name, but that's what it is. And then you're adding that, and then you're selecting the date to it, and you edit it. Then you get to this point, and you select the folder, and then you type this, and instead of offer, you just change it to removing contingency home inspection, or removing contingency septic and well, or something specific. So that's, you're changing this part of it usually. That's just nice, clean contract writing, and it's very concise. When people look at their emails, they'll see an attachment. I've had some from other big box store brokerage situations, and it just has a long list of letters and numbers to it. It's like, I don't even know what this document is. Let's open it. And you start figuring it out. But this is just taking a little bit more pride in your contract writing, okay? So it brings you up to this window. If you had other documents to add, you can upload them here. Or if you wanted to save this and actually create a PDF, you could do that. So not just yet, you would actually have to select your documents first. So I'm just going to, what documents do I want to add out of this? I suppose I'll just add everything. Again, you would be adding everything for your offer. Your offer is not going to look like this because this is kind of a theoretical training. But your offer would be a little bit more concise pertaining to the documents that are for your offer specifically and for your client. Okay. So I did all that. Now it's time to prioritize the list. As you can see, you can shift these things. You can associate a value, so 1. So I want that document to be number 1. Okay. That part's important to me. I know there are some others that when you're reviewing offers, try to front load the good stuff, right? So it's just little things with regard to contract writing. Instead of just being like, hey, this is a personal property. Here's a fair housing document to lead the way. Take a little bit more pride into it than that. So let's front weight some of this stuff. So this is a prequel. We can have that close to the top. inspection waiver. I like to see that close to the top. Maybe we'll make that number 2. These are addendums pertaining to the offer itself. I don't usually do contingencies high up there. That would look weird. Let's do the escalation really high. Let's make that number 2. And then I'm going to do purchase and sales at number, I think 4 is where we're at there. Do I have anything good? Okay, that's fine with me. All right, so I scrolled to the top, got the prequel letter, the escalation. I mean, you can even do the escalation first, then prequel, then waiving. Yeah, that's nice to me. I think that looks good. So then I'm going to select signers, and then I'm going to come down. I'm going to work out of transactions instead of contacts. Transactions is, again, that's the part of that manila folder. It has our contacts in it specifically, and then it's just a little bit more concise versus when I do contacts, it's this massive thing of Rolodex, and you're selecting out of that. You don't want that. It's also nice because you get the other party involved too. This is not how you present the offer to another party, but if it was last minute, you're like, all right, I'm going to have my client be the signer, and then I need the listing agent to get it right after. You can set it up, select the listing agent, and then she'll be CC'd the minute your client signs. So that's how you do this part. So I'm going to unselect her. Abby's going to be the signer. I'll select. Okay. Now I'll go to tools. So scrolling down here, and I don't want to go too far into detail here, but it should automatically fill in a lot of this stuff. Proofread, scrolling from the top to the bottom at least twice, going through everything. And I just go nice and slow, going through every page. If there's a document, let's say if you didn't want this page, you can make an edit. All right, so here's the 2 pages. I'm going to click select. Let's say I just didn't want this page for whatever reason. I can delete that. Now, whoop, actually, I don't like that either. Yeah, just the first page. There we go. Now I'm going to save it. All right, go back to tools. So now it's just that one page of the prequel. Really nice. You can see that this part is blank. Be sure that you grab your client's full name. You're going to want to type the address. You're going to want to type the address again because it's in this paragraph right here. You're going to want to type in seller's name. Okay? You want to make sure that all of this is correct. If they're waiving the engineer's inspection, lead, radon, etc., grab their signature, drop date, and so on. If you don't know the seller's name, you should be reading the MLS. It's right here. Okay? So scrolling down, continue scrolling. We're just proofing as we go. It should be dropping everything in where we need it. We're proofing, taking care of things. We keep going. Again, your offer will look kind of different than what's on the example here. But you're really just making sure if there is anything that you needed to change last minute, you know, maybe it's Yates County or something. You can actually, at this point in the window, make those adjustments, okay? So you can check and do certain things, which is nice in the final edit. Okay? But I know we're pretty good here. I'm just trying to see. For you, you're not scrolling fast. You at home, you're reading, you're doing the correct thing. I just wanted to kind of scroll past some of this stuff because you need to be proofing, double checking things. I'm just going to kind of go by a lot of this because we've already done a lot of that. There will be lead. There's going to be the PCD. So this is the PCD. Just make sure they've signed that. Okay. For lead, their full name, their initial right here, their initial again and again and again. When you're in the house, you have this conversation with them. Did they waive it? If you want it to be an option, you do what's called radio buttons, and they'd have option 1 or 2. Okay. They sign, date, initial, then drop it to you. You can sign. You can sign for lead. You can sign for all sorts of things. You can sign as a selling broker on one of the other documents. Then you click next and send. So that's it, everyone. Hopefully this video was helpful to you. Basically, that is the general gist in order to send out your offer. And from there, you click send, and the document will be on its way over to your client. So from this point, I usually give them a brief call or a text, usually a text, just saying, hey, it's in your inbox. Can you please review and sign at your earliest convenience? Once you finish completing signing, send me a text, let me know that you've completed it, and from there, I'll know to look for it that way. And I'll get it sent out prior to the delayed negotiations or what have you. Let them know that, because otherwise sometimes they'll think that if you don't give them a deadline, then they're just going to camp on it. They'll be like, oh, I have all night tonight. I'll have all morning. It's like, well, I got to get out by noon, and I have appointments in the morning. So what are we doing here? So make sure that you give them kind of a deadline there. So that's kind of some of the general tools. Play around with some of the stuff. You really can't break Authenticign. You just have to kind of get comfortable with it a little bit. Hopefully the combination of this video and the part 1 will really get you not 100%. Frankly, there really is no training video that can get you 100% of the way there, because your client's unique, the property you're reviewing is unique, and there's some stuff that's just customization. I just did a recent rent back situation where my client provided an additional 2 months, and we had to figure out a per diem, which is basically a rent per day of the cost, his holding cost of what it would actually cost him to close on the property, not live in it, and then rent out the property for that duration of time. So I certainly don't want to, fill these videos with too much of those types of explanations and things. For those type of one-off, what do I do in this case? Give me a call directly. That's part of the training, the coaching, and I'm sure would be happy to give you my expertise as far as my experiences and what that looks like. Yeah, I think that pretty much has addressed everything on my end. Hopefully this video was helpful to you. And again, if you do have any questions, don't hesitate, give me a call or text, and we'll go from there. All right, best of luck out there. Hope you make a lot of accepted offers happen. And hopefully for a lot of your clients, some very excited clients that will be moving into their home. All right, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.